Hello everybody, it's Jay Roby. I've got a new chess series that I've been wanting to do for quite some time now, but I was just trying to figure out how to best do it in a video format. And the video series is going to focus on positional training. In other words, looking at the position and analyzing it, and then trying to derive the best possible move by going mentally through lines and variations to arrive at, hopefully, what would be a strong move in the position as opposed to a poor move or a weak move. And the way that I came up with to do this, and hopefully you'll find this useful as well, is to take a Grandmaster game, and I moved through the game on my viewer to a point where I felt that there was kind of a critical juncture in the match, and then instead of looking at what the Grandmaster played on his next move, I came up with my own lines and variations and tried to arrive at what I would have played in the position. And now I'm hoping that over time I'll get closer and closer to coming up with lines that the Grandmasters thought of. In this particular video I didn't come up with a Grandmaster move, but what I will do is I'm going to show you the ones that I thought were good and the ones that I thought just wouldn't work. And on that note, it's important to note that the chess books that talk about positional practice say that if you're mentally thinking up lines and variations, that if you realize something just isn't going to work out very well for you, to drop it and move on to the next one. Now that being said, you might have kind of a branch-like idea for your variations. So in other words, you might like your first two moves, but on your third move you're like, well, no, that's going to give my opponent an advantage. But you really like the first two, you can stick with that and then kind of branch out and change the third move. Now in this video, as this is something that I'm kind of working on now, I didn't get into a lot of the branch type variations. What I did is I came up with just fairly linear lines and variations, and I'm going to show you what I came up with and what I decided would be the best move that I would play in the position, which by the way did not turn out to be what the Grandmaster played here. But I'll take you through all of the lines that I came up with, and if this is something that you want to practice, I definitely recommend that you write it down to begin with, because from what I can read in chess books, over time, instead of having to write them down, you'll get better and better at doing this so that you can actually do it in your head during the match without losing too much time off of the clock. So the first thing that we're going to do here before we get started is this is a match between Capablanca and Nimzowitsch. Capablanca is playing black, and it's black to move. Now before I get into my candidate lines that I came up with, we're going to take a quick look at the position. Now when I was looking at this position in my viewer, I noticed a couple things. First of all, material is equal. White has captured a rook and a pawn, and black has captured two knights. The position is kind of open and closed at the same time. Like white has this bishop here on h5 that's influencing this diagonal and can also swing back to this diagonal. And my castle position as black, if I were playing this match, has a light square diagonal access into the position, which white can take advantage of. I noticed that the black pawns here on h, g, and f could be very useful in the match. In particularly, at some point, the pawn could be pushed up to g6 to support the pawn on f5, even though the f5 pawn has two defenders already. Or at some point later in the match, possibly a pawn storm could be tried here. I also noticed that black has two knights and two bishops remaining, and the general principle is if you have an open position, bishops tend to perform better because of the open diagonals, but in a closed position it's nice to have your knights because they could jump over pieces. Like for example, these pawns here, a knight could skirt around the pawns and get into the enemy position. But other things that I noticed, the pawns here on b6 and a7 are connected. There is one undefended black piece currently, and that's the rook on f8. But white really doesn't have anything immediately that's going to threaten that rook, so I don't think that that's necessarily important to consider right away when looking at the candidate moves. We also have a very nice influence along this dark square diagonal here, leading into white's castle position. Now when we look at white's position, we can see that the castle position is a little bit deteriorated here, as is black's, but we do have this access along this diagonal, which is nice. The white bishop is the stronger of the white's bishops simply because it's got more options, and the white dark square bishop is currently closed in by its own pieces. So that's something to definitely consider. And I also noticed that the rook here is exerting a lot of influence on the semi-open e file, and and that this rook could probably be bolstered up even farther with white's other rook and even queen at some point in the match. So that was definitely something to consider when thinking about the candidate moves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the candidate moves that I came up with in this position, and then hopefully you come up with your own, and you share yours, and you'll get to see mine, and then we'll take a look at what the Grandmaster played. So let's get started here. I'll clear the board off. And if you want, probably be a good time now to pause the video and try to generate your candidate moves, whether you write them down or do it in your head, and try to come up with, I would say, probably 3 or 4 at least would be a good starting point for that. So the first thing that I was wondering is if there was a way that I could take care of that light square bishop. So I looked at bishop to e8. But unfortunately, I highly doubt my opponent would capture that bishop and let me recapture with the rook, simply because it adds another defender to e7, and really that would not be in white's best interest. So most likely what would happen is the bishop would just immediately go to something like f3. So I realized that that line was definitely not going to do anything really for black, so I moved on to the next one. And I was still curious if there was something that I could do with that bishop, so I thought about knight to d5, but I figured that my opponent would probably just play pawn to c4, at which point I would play knight to f6 attacking the bishop, but I realized that probably the white player would actually want me to capture that bishop in this position, simply because white can simply play pawn to d5 here, and if I come in and take, the queen can come in and capture, and now all of a sudden I've got the dark square bishop opened up to my castle position. I have the queen here on h5, very dangerous, and I've also still got this rook exerting influence along the e-file. And my next move would have to be to save the knight, so really I could go to, say, b8, but really positionally I think that that would have just really helped white's position, so I didn't really see anything beneficial in going down those lines. So I thought I'd try something else, and I thought about bishop to c8 with hopes of getting my bishop into a fianchetto type setup. I figured my opponent would probably respond pawn to c4, kind of priming this bishop, getting it ready to have influence on the board. And I would play my bishop into the fianchetto position, and my opponent would push the pawn down to c5. I wouldn't capture here, but instead I would play my queen to d8, hoping to jump this knight and get a nice check square here on h4. But I figured my opponent would probably just simply play bishop to f3. I would go ahead with my plan, put my knight onto g6, but from here he could play pawn to g3, and now all of a sudden I have to worry about this this bishop here, and now my check square on h4 is taken away. But I did think about possibly doing a sacrifice here, playing the knight up to h4. If my opponent captures, come in with check, the king would go to g1, I could check again, but then the king could just simply go to f1, and I couldn't really think of a way that I could finish off the white player in this position, and I'd be down 2 points of material, so I had to drop that idea as well. So I moved to a different line, and I was thinking about moving g6 right away, and I figured that my opponent would probably reply bishop to f3, at which point I could play knight to g8, kind of giving my knight access points onto h6 as well as f6. I figured my opponent would probably play pawn to g3 in this position, attacking my bishop, at which point I could play my bishop to g5. And I figured from this position I'd probably have some good chances, at least it'd be a good fighting game. And actually this was the line that I figured that I probably would have went with if I was playing the actual game. Now of course this wasn't what Capablanca played, and we'll take a look at what Capablanca played now. And he came up with a move that I didn't even consider, which was knight to g8, and that just highlights the importance of how much I need to practice this. But basically from here, white's best possible line, according to the computer, is to lose a pawn. But Nimzowitsch didn't play the best possible move, and instead Capablanca was allowed to seize the position and basically create a nice mating net around the king that was unavoidable. So from here, Capablanca brings his rook up, white comes in and takes the knight, and Capablanca plays a very nice bishop to f2, from which there is no escape for the white king in a few moves, so white resigned. So I definitely enjoyed going over this video, and I think that over time it's going to be very beneficial in terms of analyzing the position, and I'm looking forward to reading about what you came up with and what your candidate moves were. So take care, hope you enjoy the video, and we'll see you next time.